Hello, everyone. My name is Colm O'Rourke. I'm the Industry Engagement Officer with NSAI, and I'm here to present today on MDR expectations during MDR transition period. So, notified body perspective. Obviously, I'll be speaking on behalf of NSAI, but I'll try and give as rounded view, I suppose, as possible in terms of what notified bodies might be thinking. So, we'll kick things off. My first slide is going to look at what I'll actually cover. So there is the date of application. Obviously, everyone is aware at this point that the date of application has thankfully been shifted by 12 months. So we're going to take a look at some of the implications of that. And then obviously, as I said, we're coming to you remotely. So we need to look at COVID-19 that is impacting medical device certification. So I'll speak a little bit about remote auditing and different things around that area. And then the bulk of my presentation really is this transition period. So what will be our notified body expectations during that transition period? So I will look at, I suppose, what does the transition period mean? What exactly is applicable? And then we'll discuss a little bit about some of the scenarios that might arise in that. So that will be the chunk of my presentation, but we're going to get straight into it now with the date of application and the delay. So what is covered in delay? Basically, there's a number of articles in the MDR are amended by this delay or will be amended. I mean, it's not 100% signed off yet because it hasn't been published in the official journal, but I think with the vote, the overwhelming majority vote last Friday, I don't think anyone expects that there will be any issue with that. So what this amendment does is it replaces in many articles within the MDR where it refers to the 26th of May 2020, it's replacing that text with 26th of May 2021. There are a couple of dates that might be February or March 2020 that are then being adjusted to the same month but 2021. So that's what we're looking at. What it's applicable to within the regulation are all of these various articles. So you can find online the exact text of what the delay is and refers to each of these. So we're going to take a look on the next slide at not all of them, but what some of these mean. So if we look, particular note, Article 1, Part 2 is the Annex 16 devices. So these are devices without an intended medical purpose, which again, given the audience listening to this could count for some of you guys. So this would be non-vision correcting contact lenses would be an example of this. So just those color contact lenses, that the date of application for everything associated with those is included in this delay and therefore is pushed out by 12 months. Article 17 is single-use devices and their reprocessing. Again, those requirements are pushed out by 12 months. UDAMED, look, I'll refer to UDAMED a few times throughout this presentation. I don't really, nobody really knows exactly what is happening with UDAMED. I certainly don't, and it is still a very complex area. There's still a lot of gray zones around it, I suppose, but broadly speaking, this article has been pushed out by 12 months as well. But what that means, whether we'll have full UDAMED in May of 2021 or it's going to be the 2022 date that was announced back in December, we still don't know yet. So that's sort of yet to be seen. Article 120. So this is really, really important that this is the transition provisions article, that these were shifted within this proposed delay. So of this, I suppose what are the points to note is that notified bodies can still issue MDD certificates. So this is absolutely critical for us as a notified body, is that the delay allows us another 12 months to continue the directive, the medical device directive work that we have underway right now, the recertification work we have underway. So it's brilliant that is included in this. So it's a new date of application for PMS, Vigilance, registration of economic operators and devices. So we're going to talk a lot about this, but these are the MDR aspects that you all would have been, really diligently preparing for, that would have been coming into effect in, 5 weeks or whatever it would have been. These are those requirements are pushed out to May 2021. So again, this is providing huge breathing space for industry and notified bodies as well. And we're going to talk quite a bit about those later on in it. So industry can continue to place MDD devices on the market until the new date of application. And then, of course, after the date of application as well, if they're availing, if manufacturers are availing of the Article 120, Section 3 transition provision, of course, you can continue to place MDD devices up until, May 2024. So MDR compliant devices can be placed on the market prior to the new date of application. So again, this was important just to clarify that, there was a little bit of initial confusion. Can you still place an MDR device on the market before this? And yes, of course you can. And following on from that is MDR designated notified bodies can issue MDR certificates prior to this new date of application. So, NSAI, like a number of other, I think is there maybe 12 of us now, 12 notified bodies designated under the MDR, we can issue MDR certificates, right away before the new date of application. So that's important as well for the system to be able to do that. Clinical investigations which have started under the MDD prior to the new date of application can continue, and in fact you can initiate clinical investigations under the MDD for another 12 months. If you were planning an investigation some point later this year, I'm sure the COVID crisis was going to have impacted that anyway, but if you were planning one later this year, you would have been planning to initiate it under the MDR. Now it can be initiated under the MDD, but once the new date of application rolls around, that May 2021, those particular requirements about vigilance reporting during the clinical investigation will kick in. And then this Article 123 is the entry into force provisions. Okay, so that, I suppose, is all the elements that have been covered in this, in the delay. And what does it mean practically? So we've kind of covered some of this already, but the new date of application for implementation of these requirements. So practically, this is huge. This is, requirements that you guys as industry would, have had ready to go in 5 weeks' time. You now have an additional 12 months. So that is a really big bonus for everyone, and for us notified bodies that would have to audit against these requirements as well. It really does take the pressure off. So notified bodies can continue to issue MDD certs. So I mean, if you were to ask me, what does the delay mean to me? This is it. This is the most important thing from notified body perspective, is we have another 12 months to finish out the MDD work we have going. So I mean, I think everyone in industry and notified bodies realizes that the incredible pressure that the whole sector has been under the last 6, 8, 9 months, with this huge crunch of MDD recertifications, we now have an extra 12 months to complete those. So that is a huge advantage for everyone. And then that conformity assessment can continue with designated notified bodies under the MDR. So this is really good as well, because there are manufacturers that want to, they might have a new product launch or whatever the situation might be, want to initiate conformity assessment under the MDR, and that can be done as well. I've put note the COVID situation here, and we'll talk a little bit about that, because obviously that does impact our auditing ability. So third country implications as well. So just briefly to touch on this, I suppose with Switzerland, a lot of people would have been familiar with the situation where the mutual recognition agreement was not in place. And if date of application was this coming May, then Switzerland would have become a third country automatically. There is another 12 months now, I suppose, for Switzerland to finalize that mutual recognition agreement. And in that 12-month period, the next 12 months, Swiss manufacturers can continue sort of business as normal. Turkey, no agreement currently in place, but again, I suppose this buys another 12 months for negotiation and work on any agreements there. And then, keeping in the same vein, is Brexit. It's with kind of all the Brexit talk had died down the last few months, which was nice. I think there'd been a number of months where you couldn't go to a conference without hearing about Brexit, but just, I suppose, to put it out there as well, it's important that right now the Brexit transition agreement that expires the 31st of December this year. So UK notified bodies can continue, UK-based notified bodies can continue to issue MDD certificates only up until the end of December this year, 31st of December, even though the date of application is out until May. Come the 1st of January 2021, the UK will be a third country. So this counts for certificates being transferred between a UK-based entity, UK-based notified body, and their European counterpart as well. So they don't have exactly the same full 12 months that other notified bodies they have. They only have until the end of the Brexit transition agreement, which as it stands now is 31st of December. Okay, what is the impact of this delay? Proposed, it's not proposed anymore, I should correct that wording. What is the impact of this on MDD submissions? So I guess there's been some discussion within Team NB on a coordinated position. I mean, I think where possible, especially going forward under the MDR, Team NB tries to be, coordinated in our approach to things. So there has been discussion on as a group of notified bodies, what we will make of the implications of this delay, but there may or may not be a coordinated position. But I suppose there has been some discussion. I guess, coming from my perspective, from our perspective at NSAI, it would appear to us the intent of the delay is to give industry, which is notified bodies, competent authorities, all you manufacturers, it's to give us all breathing space to focus on urgent priorities related to COVID-19. So that, I guess, is what we are taking the intent of the delay to be. If we look at the initial DJ Sante letter that was outlined, the proposed delay, it talks about using the additional time appropriately, and talks about that incomplete work should be completed. So the inference there being that the work that is open should be completed as opposed to beginning new MDD work. So I guess that what that boils down to for us at NSAI, and as it stands now, is that we would not be accepting new MDD submissions, so new recertifications or new applications under the MDD, even though there is an extra 12 months. We would not be accepting those, apart from significant changes which don't involve design or intended use. So throughout the transition period, manufacturers under the MDD, might need to make minor significant changes, something like a material supplier, additional sterilization capacity. Of course, we'll still be accepting those changes under the MDD. Significant changes to design or intended use, that's a different situation. I'll speak a little bit about that later on. So yeah, it's a question. As soon as the delay was proposed, we started getting from our clients was, okay, we've been planning an MDR submission. Can we now make this under the MDD? And I suppose we feel that wasn't what the intent of the delay was. It was to give us time to complete the work that is that's outstanding right now, because obviously we've had to restructure our work a little bit because of the COVID-19 crisis. So that's the position. And as well, I think it's, there's the danger of, if we start opening the door to new MDD submissions, is, in 12 months time, are we going to have the same situation that we have right now, where there's a huge bottleneck and a huge, amount of pressure for everyone, industry and notified bodies? We certainly don't want that to happen. So that's NSAI's position as it is right now. Okay, so that was everything on the proposed delay. So overall, it's incredibly positive, I think, for everyone involved. It was a very sensible decision. We're certainly very happy about it. It gives us all a little bit more time. I think we need to be clever how we use that time. It's important that this isn't a kicking the can down the road, and in 12 months' time we're in the same pressure cooker environment. We have the capacity to prevent that happening. So I think we need to work together, notified bodies in the industry. But overall, it's a very, very valid improvement, I suppose, is to have that delay by 12 months. So if we look next to second topic, which is COVID-19, again, the reason I'm coming to you remotely as opposed to looking at you all in Berlin, how is this impacting medical device certification? So I guess, and for here I'm speaking particularly from NSAI's point of view, is we've prioritization of technical file reviews where the device has some form of clinical utility in the COVID-19 setting. So this is what we have been doing. So we have a number of manufacturers that are producing devices that are used somewhere in the treatment pathway, be it detection or testing, actual treatment and ventilation, or whatever it might be within that COVID-19 setting. We have clients that have active reviews ongoing with us, so we have diverted our resources to focus particularly on those devices, and that's I suppose what we felt was the right thing to do. We've worked in close contact with our competent authority, the HPRA here in Ireland, regarding what exactly those prioritisation areas should be specifically. And it really comes back to the purpose of the delay of the date of application. It allows us, I suppose it ensures that non-COVID related clients of ours are not going to be disadvantaged. So if we were working on your file right now and your product is not COVID-19 related, we may have diverted resources away from your review and focused it on one of our other clients that is producing something that's vital to the COVID-19 treatment pathway. If we didn't have this delay, then there would be a chance that you might not achieve recertification under the MDD before the deadline, and that would be really unfair. It's through no fault of your own. So what the delay allows us to do is focus on COVID And then, when this situation improves, as we all hope it will, and I'm sure it will, then we still have additional time to come back and finish the work that we had ongoing. So that really, I suppose, is the core of what we feel the delay of date of application is. So then impact on auditing. So of course it's having it's having a significant impact on how we audit, how we conduct our business as notified body. I suppose the product technical file reviews, that's a desktop-based review anyway. A number of our staff work remotely, so that luckily that side of the business is able to continue on without too many disruptions, apart from kids and dogs around the house that people might not be used to having. But it's our on-site QMS 13485 auditing that's clearly been significantly impacted by this. The MDCG has released a really nice guidance document. So that's the 2020 number 4 document, came out just maybe 2 weeks ago this month. And it talks about the options that are open to a notified body, and they broadly fall into 3 categories. It's postponing the audit, the interactive remote auditing, and there is an IAF, that's International Accreditation Forum document that's already out there since 2018 that you guys might want to refer to. It speaks about remote auditing options, and then an offsite documentation review. In reality, what we are doing, and we assume most notified bodies, is a combination of the latter two. Nobody wants to postpone an audit because that's just going to cause so many issues with a huge backlog of audits towards hopefully the end of the year if travel restrictions are lifted. So it's a combination of an off-site documentation review and then an interactive remote audit, and we've been conducting them the past number of weeks, so I think they're interesting. It's a bit of a learning curve for everyone, but we have been doing interactive remote audits, and I'm sure that some of you guys in industry will have been subject to some kind of an interactive remote audit as well. What we have to do as a notified body is develop a procedure for conducting. I suppose we need to do a risk assessment. So it's case by case. We need to do a risk-based case by case review of all our upcoming audits. And this is something we've been doing for a number of weeks now. And, I think it's important for us to communicate what we're looking at during these. So what really the focus is, I suppose, what processes were audited in the previous audit. So if we conducted a recertification audit on your facility last year, in a research we cover all processes, which is great. You're in a good shape. Then we're looking to do a first surveillance audit, and that's something that lends itself quite well to being done remotely. We would look at past audit performance. If when we audited production previously there was a significant number of findings, that can make remote auditing a little more risky, I suppose. And we pick on production here because obviously that's an area that's very difficult. Well, I shouldn't say very difficult. It's more difficult to audit production remotely than it is document control or corrective actions, internal audits. There are many areas of the quality system that lend themselves well to remote auditing. Production is not exactly one of them. So we would look at that, and I suppose in keeping with this is how long have we been auditing this company? Is like, from our perspective, has this been a client of NSAI for 10 years? Do we know the quality system quite well? Are we confident in the level of conformity, or did we just start working with you guys last year? We haven't really built up that relationship and background. So these are considerations. And then obviously that last point there is what activities and processes are actually conducted on site. You may well be a virtual manufacturer that has everything outsourced, in which case, normally when we would come to audit you, it's pretty much a desktop-based audit. We're just doing it face-to-face. So again, something like that it's possible to do that remotely. So these are the considerations when we're doing our case-by-case risk assessment for how we can conduct the remote audit. Areas which cannot be audited remotely need to be covered at another point in the cycle. So that's clear. If if it's a surveillance one, we can't do production, then next year we obviously are going to need to know we have to look at production. Recertification audits can be done remotely as well, so the guidance document tells us this, but it also said that we need to follow up on an on-site audit as soon as we can to cover those areas that I suppose we felt that we couldn't cover fully appropriately in the remote setting. So it's great to know, and that I suppose it maintains the device supply as well. We don't want to be suspending certificates because we can't get on site. Of course, that's the worst case scenario. So we can do the recertification audits, just a little trickier, and we may need to follow up, for a smaller, perhaps it's only a one-day follow-up on-site audit to cover something like production. So it's good news that we can do these recert audits. Scope expansion and initial certification audits. So again, right away, these are not audits that you would ideally do remotely. I suppose because you're adding new elements, especially like an initial certification where we've never been there before. Certainly that's not ideal to do it remotely, and in most cases we won't be offering that service remotely, but the guidance document does, I suppose, give us room to justify situations where there's the particular product in question has, again, a clinical significance in relation to COVID-19. So, if you're an existing client of NSAI and you're making a particular group of devices, but you think you can make another device that will be important in relation to COVID-19, that's a scope expansion. We typically wouldn't do that, but because of the kind of product you're intending to produce, that's something we would consider then is doing a scope expansion remotely. Again, it goes without saying that as soon as we could get on site, we would, in those situations, the scope expansion or the initial certification, we would try and get on site as soon as we can to sort of verify what we felt we couldn't cover appropriately. The guidance document is worded primarily towards the directive, but it does actually speak about these initial certifications or scope expansions under the context of the MDR as well. So there is a potential we can do an MDR initial certification for the company remotely. Again, it's not going to happen very often. We have to be very clear in how we justify that as a notified body. We need to communicate it to our competent authority, and really the only scenario where it would be considered is where the device is we feel critical to the COVID-19 treatment pathway in some way, detection or treatment pathway. And competent authorities may ask to observe such remote audits. So this is nothing new to have a competent authority tag along and observe us as notified body auditing. So, stands to reason they may want to observe a remote audit as well. So that's just something to expect, I guess. Okay, so that sort of covers the COVID-19. Not a huge amount of time on it, I suppose, and presumably you guys will have some questions, but it's really just to highlight those main points that with remote auditing, we really are trying to keep the show on the road as much as we can. We feel that's important. I don't think industry or notified bodies have the capacity for a huge bolus of audits in around the end of the year, if it is the case that travel restrictions will be lifted by then. So we're glad that there are those remote audit options available to us. So if we move on to the last part of presentation, really is the biggest part, is the transition period expectations from a notified body point of view. So I guess the first thing really to start it off is what exactly are the MDR transition period requirements? We talk about the new date of application. So again, new date of application being 26th of May 2021. What are these transition period requirements? And where this information comes from in the MDR is Article 120, Section 3. So it's the post-market surveillance, it's market surveillance, vigilance, and registration of economic operators. I've put market surveillance in there with an asterisk because this is the role of the competent authority, but it's just to make you aware that these are requirements that your competent authority need to fulfill from the new date of application. So these are those requirements. It's very important that you clearly understand what is in scope for your notified body during the transition period. So throughout the next few slides, I'm going to try and, I suppose, keep it as close to reality as possible and constantly consider what it will be like when we, as your notified body or any notified body, is on-site auditing during this transition period. It's going to be a bit of an unusual experience for everyone, because there will be products that are still on the market under MDD. So we're looking at MDD. You may have new products under MDR. So it's going to be, it'll take a little bit of getting used to. I've no doubt we will, but it's important, I suppose, in the terminology is what's in scope for a notified body audit during the transition period. And then, we've been talking about what are these the transition period requirements, the sort of MDR bare minimum requirements, so to speak, the PMS, the vigilance and registration. But it's important to state as well that obviously a new product application under the MDR has to comply with all applicable requirements. So when we talk about the transition period, we're talking about MDD devices that are remaining on the market until they can remain there until 2024, so long as they comply with these particular MDR requirements. But if you are launching a product at the end of this year or next year under the MDR, obviously it's not just these requirements. You have to fulfill the PMS, the vigilance and registration. It's all applicable MDR requirements. So important to just put that out there. Okay, so if we look first at post-market surveillance, and again, I suppose, like I said, I think it's my third time speaking to FCLIN now, and every presentation I've probably talked about post-market surveillance. It's it's a huge aspect of what the MDR is. A huge amount of new requirements are within this PMS section. So we're looking at Articles 83 to 86, and some of you guys will have heard me say before that the MDR is incredibly prescriptive in this in many areas, and in particular in the post-market surveillance area, and that's a really good thing. So if we look, for example, at Article 83, that A to H outlines what the system must do. So it's telling you what your system must do, which is, from your point of view, is really valuable, because then when you're designing it, what it must do. From our point of view as notified body, it's really valuable because we know what to look for. We need to see the evidence that it's doing what the MDR says it has to do. If we look at the PMS plan in Article 84, it refers you out to Annex 3, which is your technical documentation on post-market surveillance annex. And broadly speaking, if you look at Part A, it deals with plan outputs, and Part B, you could say, deals with plan inputs. So again, it's structured very nicely, and there's a really strong blueprint within the MDR for you as a manufacturer to sort of take that, and this is the skeleton of what your PMS system must be, and then you're tailoring it to suit you within your own quality system. So these are the requirements regarding post-market surveillance. Again, PSUR, Article 86. So we would see this as really the primary output of the PMS system. We know what it has to do: summarize results and conclusions of your system. The interval, again, we'll all be pretty familiar with this, but it's annual for 2Bs and 3s, and every 2 years for the Class 2A. Class 1's not applicable. They have a post-market surveillance report for Class 1 devices. So for the highest risks, the Class 3 and the implantable devices, which again, there'll be many of you listening today perhaps could be in the IOL space, so you're looking at implantable devices, they need to be submitted to your notified body for review. So they're annual updates and submitted to your notified body for review. And the last note there is, I suppose, devices that are availing of the transition period. So these are devices that are staying on the market until 2023, early 2024 under the MDD. Come the date of application, the new date of application, which is May 2022, that's the start of the clock for when you need to submit your PSUR to your notified body. So we're looking at May 2022. So sorry, I should have said 2021 earlier. So the start of the clock is May 2021. And for those implantable Class 3 devices, your notified body will expect to see your first PSUR in May of 2022. Of course, if you launch a product at the end of this year under the MDR, then as soon as you're granted certification, that is the start of the clock for your PSUR interval, be it the 1 year or the 2 year. So I guess we have flagged this again as an industry group in Team NB, is that we would have a number of clients in this Class 3 and implantable space, and we're going to receive a huge number of PSURs all at once in May of 2022. And that's very difficult for industry to prepare for, and notified bodies. There isn't a resolution right now, but I suppose it's just to point out that many of you will perhaps thought of this as as a potential bottleneck area, and we have as well, but it's just been highlighted with no particular resolution. So if we look at vigilance, so I guess the bulk, as I said, is in that post-market surveillance area. So the bulk of these new MDR requirements with regard to the transition provision are in the post-market surveillance. But we look at vigilance as well. It's Articles 87 to 89. What we'd all be familiar with right now is our MedDev 212.1. And if we just look at the reporting timelines, we've got a serious public health threat being 2 days, death or unanticipated serious deterioration in health is 10 days, and others is 30 days. So these are the intervals we would all be familiar with. These are the intervals you will have incorporated into your quality system and your procedures and your reporting timelines, and what we will be used to auditing. So under the MDR, if we look at Article 87, the first two items we spoke about are the same in 2 and 10 days, but any other serious incident is 15 days. So it's reduced, the reporting time, it's cut it in half. So this is a big challenge. It's a big challenge for industry, and I would have spoken of this before at previous FCLIN presentations, is that you need to, not alone is it a case you obviously need to revise your procedures within your quality system that they're compliant with this new 15-day requirement, but it's the practical implication of that. You now have half the amount of time to complete the investigation. Well, I shouldn't say complete, because it's unrealistic you'll have it completed, but to initiate the investigation and to report it. So, it's important you look at, staffing and resourcing around this area, given you have half the amount of time to do it. So again, this is something that we will look to see that you are compliant to from the new date of application, May 2021. So if we're auditing you in July or August of next year, and you're availing of the transition period in that your device is on the market under the MDD, these requirements under the MDR are still applicable to you. So we will want to see that your quality system is in compliance with these particular requirements here. So it's important that you're considering that now. And again, I suppose these were requirements that were about to take effect in 5 weeks' time. So I would assume that many of you were either there or very close to being compliant with them anyway. Now you have time, I suppose, to maybe go back and look and see, is there any improvements you can make, say a little bit of extra time. So trend reporting, yeah, we need to consider this as well. So this is articles 88 to 89. Trend reporting, I suppose the text of the MDR talks quite a bit about UDEMED, because this is the medium through which these trend reports are to be submitted. But of course, with the UDEMED delay, I think, certainly I'm unclear as to exactly how this will how it will work going forward. But I suppose it's important that you consider that, and we as a notified body need to consider what the situation will be. I think it's important to know what your competent authority, your local competent authority, is thinking on this as well. So if we the next section is registration of economic operators and devices. So in keeping with the same thing I just mentioned on UDEMED, it does make this quite difficult to discuss, because obviously this registration piece is a huge. It's one of the UDEMED modules. It's a huge chunk of UDEMED, and we don't exactly know where that is right now. Further guidance is required. Of course, it is definitely. We're all a bit unclear as to how you will fulfill these requirements. There's been a lot of talk about following the national system that's in place with your competent authority. So I think it's very important for you as manufacturers to be proactive, not to bury your head in the sand, but to be proactive and reach out to your competent authorities and ask what are their thoughts on this. How are they expecting you to comply with this? And if you're a manufacturer listening to this today and you're not based in the European Union, then it would be your authorized representative needs to contact the competent authority that they're registered with in their member state, and to see what is the thinking on this. And is it going to be a national registration initially that then gets migrated to UDEMED? Some of that finer detail is certainly not there right now, but it's important to know, I suppose, where your competent authority is on their thinking of this. Because again, this is something that I suppose we will need to audit you against when we're on site. But of course, we need to take into account if there's no clear guidance, and if it's not exactly clear how you're supposed to comply, that's something we need to consider when we're auditing as well. We can't, of course, expect you to be compliant to something that doesn't exist. So that is it really for the particular requirements. So when we talk about the transition provision requirements that you need to comply with, it's PMS, it's vigilance, and it's registration. So we've gone through them. There's a lot of detail there. These are things that, as I've said, you would have had pretty much ready to go, but we now have some extra time. So what we're going to look at next is possible scenarios. Now, again, I suppose just to preface this, is my expectation is that pretty much everyone listening to this presentation today are established manufacturers, so that I suppose for the last few slides here, I'm not going to be considering the scenario where we have maybe a startup company with a new product and a new company to register with a notified body. I'm under the assumption that everyone here is an established manufacturer. So in saying that, I suppose broadly speaking, I've outlined two scenarios here. There's the early transition, where you will convert your existing MDD certificates to MDR certificates in the next 12 to 18 months. And then there's a late transition, where you'll wait until perhaps the last 12 to 18 months of the transition period to convert to full MDR compliance. So broadly speaking, I guess these are the two scenarios we see in front of us. Now, there is, I suppose, a third scenario, which is a combination of these, where you may have a larger portfolio of products with multiple MDD certificates, and you may choose to migrate some to MDR early and others late. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides. So we're going to take a look first at this early transition scenario. So I guess what you need to do is schedule MDR activities with your notified body. Again, this is assuming that your notified body is MDR designated. If they are not, then I suppose it's very important to know where they are in that journey, and there's transparency here that's required. I think every notified body needs to be transparent with their client base as to where they are in the process. I think every notified body has been so far, but I guess that's if you're with a notified body that's not yet designated, it's to know exactly where they are on that timeline. And taking into account that there have been, incredible delays. I can speak from experience with NSAI. We felt we'd be designated far before we were, but just because of the nature of the process, it's quite long, it's convoluted. There's a number of people involved, and it is what it is. Unfortunately, that it takes a significant amount of time. So it's just to establish where your notified body is on that journey if they're not already designated. And then if they are designated, I suppose when is their plan to initiate MDR conformity assessment activities? So we were designated back in February, but we have not started our MDR activities yet. We are starting our MDR conformity assessment reviews from the 1st of June, and I guess the reason we've had that sort of time lag between is to get all our systems turned on internally and make sure that that everything is ready to go. We didn't want to rush it as such. So again, be aware where your notified body is on that MDR journey. The initial MDR audit, I suppose important to note here, excuse me, it may need it's likely it will need to be a standalone audit. So again, in this scenario, you're all manufacturers that have MDD devices on the market. So you need to be audited by your notified body every 12 months to ensure MDD compliance. So if also within that period you're going for MDR certification, it's not likely that we can combine an MDD surveillance audit with an MDR initial assessment. It just doesn't look like that, certainly from our point of view and from a few other notified bodies I've spoke with. So you're looking at receiving two notified body audits in the 1 year, an MDD surveillance audit, perhaps that's combined with MedSAP if you have that, and then also an MDR initial registration audit. So just an important consideration. Again, this is something to discuss with your notified body and see sort of what's their procedure and how are they planning on doing that. So I kind of mentioned this is the MDD surveillance activities must continue. So this is the notified body surveillance activities. And then, obviously you must maintain your compliance to the MDD as long as product has been placed in the market under an MDD certificate. So it's really, really important that you are maintaining your MDD compliance, that you don't forget about MDD as you're moving towards MDR. You must maintain MDD compliance. We as a notified body have to audit that compliance. So other these considerations in this early transition, I guess, is that full compliance is required at the time we come to audit you. So we've talked a lot in this transition period conversation about the particular requirements, the PMS, the Vigilance and Registration of Economic Operators. But when it comes to certifying your product under MDR, you need to comply with those 3 sections and then every other section of the MDR that is applicable to your device. So it's just important to sort of say that, because I'm conscious that I'm talking particularly about those 3 areas, and I don't want anyone to get the idea that when it comes to MDR certification for product that you don't have to comply with the full rigors of the MDR. Of course you do. So if you have multiple MDD certificates, I kind of touched on this, that you need to convert to MDR, then I suppose something to consider is staggering those submissions. So I know certainly some of our clients that would have multiple certificates with us. Many of them are looking at doing, say, one initial MDR, convert one MDD cert to an MDR cert, so one MDR new application, to do that initially, and then stagger the subsequent ones. And I guess the idea being is that, look, this is going to be a learning journey, absolutely, for both parties, for you guys as manufacturers and for us as a notified body. So that first submission, that will be it'll be an interesting process, I think, for all of us. Those first couple of files that go through, as you guys get used to us auditing you against the MDR, and as we get used to you demonstrating your compliance to the MDR. So if you have the ability to sort of have a test case, and then to take those learnings and apply them to subsequent submissions, that's a really nice option. And I suppose it's, in terms of cost, MDR, MDR is can appreciate it's an enormous cost to industry. And the certification costs are just one part of that. Of course, the testing and everything else that's involved, we fully appreciate that. But the certification costs are, excuse me, are going up without any doubt across every notified body. And it's the old saying, time is money. That's what it is with a notified body. The more time we're spending reviewing your documentation, the more expensive it's going to be. So if you are able to put as much extra work into your technical file, into everything you're submitting to us before it gets to us, then we're going to need to spend less time on it, and therefore the review hopefully will be less expensive than if it's something we have to, if there's a number of questions or deficiencies we find in the submission. So if you're in a position that you can do this, it's a nice option to go for. I appreciate it's not something everyone has the ability to do. In keeping with that, I suppose there's a potentially useful tool. So our NSAI's MDR product review forms, we've made those publicly available on our website with the link here. And these are, so I say a potentially useful tool. I genuinely believe they are, and it's not just for companies that are working with NSAI by any means. So what this product review form is we have taken the MDR apart, and we have laid out the requirements in our review form. So they're, I don't know, about 40 pages long, goes through the various sections of the MDR, and it's incredibly detailed. So in terms of using it as a tool, it can be done, if you think your technical documentation, your tech file is close to MDR compliance, then a useful exercise could be to download one of our review forms and sort of begin attempting to answer the questions in that, and that may highlight some gaps that you have, or it may give you some comfort that yes, you're going in the right direction. And of course, these are NSAI specific, but I suppose the MDR is the MDR. We haven't been looking at a different version than anyone else, so it should be a useful exercise no matter which notified body you work with. And like I said, they're freely available to get from our website. And then if you are actually a client of NSAI, this is the review form which you will need to complete and submit to us in order to for us to conduct that MDR conformity assessment. Okay, so moving on to the late transition. I guess what we're talking about here is, and I've mentioned this a few times, but it's deliberate really, is to hammer home that full MDD compliance has to be maintained in conjunction with the MDR transition period requirements, the PMS, the vigilance, and registration. Okay, so from May 2021 until 2024, if you were placing MDD product in the market, you need to maintain compliance with the MDD and these additional MDR requirements. And then at the point at which you choose to convert your MDD products to MDR, you're looking at obviously full MDR compliance at that point, not just the PMS, vigilance, and registration. So as a notified body, we will be conducting surveillance audits as usual every 12 months during the transition period. And those MDR requirements, the PMS, vigilance, and registration, they are within scope of our audit. So it will be on-site an MDD surveillance audit. So it's a 13485 audit with the MDD requirements sort of built into it, plus these additional MDR requirements. So I mentioned at the start that this is going to be a little tricky for all parties, and it certainly is. And I think, if you look at PMS, and I've mentioned what a big aspect of the MDR it is, and, the implications it has for your quality system, similar to vigilance, I suppose, it's, it's going to be a challenge for you in industry to be able to demonstrate your MDR compliance to these areas. You're going to have to revise your technical documentation and your quality system to be in compliance with these MDR requirements, but then you also need to continue to demonstrate MDD compliance as well, as long as you are placing MDD product on the market under an MDD certificate. So that sort of brings me to this point here, where we talk about two technical files should not need to be maintained at the same time for the same product. So we kind of talked through this, but it's kind of a somewhat confusing topic, or it was when I started thinking about it first anyway. So in this situation where you're doing a late transition, so you're leaving it until 2023, let's say, for example, to convert to MDR, you're going to be working on your technical file as you go. Like I said, it's already being revised, certainly as of new date of application, May 2021, to include those PMS vigilance registration requirements. And that's going to be a significant revamp of your technical file. So then, we've had some of our clients come to us and say, well, do we need to maintain an MDD technical file? Just let it sit there, not touch it, and then, be building our new MDR technical file. So essentially, do we need two sets of documentation? And I suppose our take on it, we have confirmed this with our competent authority, is that an MDR technical file can be used to demonstrate compliance to the MDD during this transition period as well. And I guess the basis for that really is that there are almost no MDD requirements that are not also in place in the MDR. Now, I'm sure someone's going to point out a mistake in what I said there. There's going to be some MDD requirement that isn't, but essentially, if you're demonstrating MDR compliance, that infers MDD compliance as well. So I guess in the example here, it's like that where you're converting that time period where you are converting your documentation from MDD to MDR. What do you need to maintain? And then as well, there's a very real scenario that may exist where you have an MDD and an MDR certificate at the same time for the same product, and that is allowable. That has been confirmed in the CAMD Q&A document. I think back even in 2018 that came out, that you've got your MDD cert valid till 2024. You're continuing to place the product in the market under the MDD. You're then in the process of achieving MDR. You achieve MDR certification, and you can start to place product on the market under the MDD cert. So we've got two certificates that are perfectly valid at the same time for essentially the same product. So it can get a little, I can see how it might get a little confusing in terms of gathering post-market surveillance information in terms of labeling. But if this situation does arise, I suppose the point I'm trying to make with this section here is that you shouldn't need to maintain two separate technical files. And I suppose considerations to that then would be some kind of an ERC to GSPR cross-reference matrix, MDD labeling, I mentioned that. So how you demonstrating to us within your MDR technical file you still meet the MDD requirements. And this last point here really is the crux of it, is you have to be able to demonstrate to your notified body that you're still in compliance with the directive as long as you are placing product on the market under a directive certificate. So that's it. How you choose to do that, there's going to be a number of different ways, but it's very important that during this transition period, you don't lose sight of that MDD, that ongoing MDD compliance, as you are availing of the Article 120 Section 3 transition provision. As, to be honest, most of our clients are availing of that, and I'm sure most people will, because it gives you more time to convert to MDR. So just really important that MDD compliance piece is not forgotten. Okay, so significant changes within this late transition discussion as well. So I touched on this briefly earlier. So if you're availing of Article 120 Section 3 transition, you cannot make a significant change to design or intended purpose of your device. If you do that, then you're essentially going to have to submit the product under the MDR as a new application in order to do that change. Okay, so we've got a really good guidance document that we've been waiting a very, very long time for. It came out last month, and it's very useful. I can tell you, as a notified body, we are using it internally, and of course industry will need to use it as well. So this significant change discussion it's something you could do an entire presentation on what is and what isn't a significant change. What's very important, I suppose, is that you discuss planned changes to your device and quality system with your notified body in advance of making the change. Now, I don't mean every single little change that you might make, because within your own quality system, you're going to have a decision tree. You're going to have some process to decide whether this is a significant change or not a significant change. If you're up revving one of your procedures because there's a typo or something like that, obviously that's not a change you need to consult your notified body about, because notified bodies will likely be charging for this as well. There may be a fee associated with consulting about whether a change is significant or not. So you make the decision based on your own internal quality system that you've been doing all along. It's those sort of gray area ones, and I think this is something that people will get better at as the transition period goes on. But initially, you're talking about, okay, I'm adding a new sterilizer to increase capacity, I'm adding a new critical supplier, I'm changing a material, I'm changing packaging, something along these lines, I'm adding a new manufacturing line. All of these things, it's at this point, it's very important, while the system is still bedding in, it's very important that you communicate with your notified body in advance of making the change, and that the notified body as some mechanism for sending back, a form of communication to you on whether they agree or disagree as to what what that change is. So every notified body will have a different system. We have a weekly meeting in NSAI where we review the proposed changes, and we make a decision whether this is significant or not significant, and we communicate that back to the client. And in terms of that, what is significant and not significant, again, it can get a bit confusing, but it's important to consider that we're talking specifically in relation to Article 120, Section 3, which is the design or intended purpose. So you might make a change. You might, add additional sterilization capacity somewhere. That's 9 times out of 10 that is not a significant change in terms of design or intended use, but it is a significant change in terms of the directive or the previous NBOG documents. So you will likely still have to submit that to your notified body for review, or how different notified bodies have different ways of doing it. So if a notified body comes back and says, okay, yes, this is not significant, it's not significant in relation to Article 120, Section 3. It may well still be a significant change that needs to be reviewed by your notified body. And I think that that's important terminology to understand. And again, it might be a little different with different notified bodies. Okay, so we're getting towards the end now. This, I think, is an important point. It's that notified bodies we're likely to impose a deadline for converting MDD products to MDR, and I'm talking late in the transition period here. So we're kind of looking into a crystal ball, talking about 2023, 2024. So it's similar to what we would have done in terms of an MDD recertification deadline, which many of us did impose the last sort of 12 or 18 months. If we look, we know that 26th of May 2024 is the final date for placing an MDD compliant product on the market. Therefore, you need to have your MDR certification achieved in advance of this. So then, of course, the big question is, how long is it going to take me? If you want to leave it till right the very end to convert to MDR for whatever reason, then how long is it going to take? I suppose it's very hard to know right now. Personally, if I was in industry and I was trying to put a plan together, I would be allowing at least 12 months to convert. So I would be looking at the latest, submitting my technical file, my MDR technical file, to my notified body in May of 2023. Now, we may find out that as we get closer to that, as everyone gets more experience, typical MDR review times are maybe they're as low as 2 or 3 months or something like that. But right now, I would be planning for that 12-month turnaround time, because I suppose we don't want that backlog. The backlog that we've all experienced, this shared pain that notified body and industry have had for, like I said, the last 6 or 9 months with MDD recertifications. It's on us if we let that happen again. And I think, we shouldn't. We need to learn from this backlog that we've experienced, and we need to put things in place to mitigate that. And that is, gradually converting your MDD to MDR, your products to MDR compliance throughout the transition period, not leaving everything until the last minute. But then also it's on us as notified bodies to say, okay, we've got a cutoff period. If you don't have this in by 23rd of May 2023, then I'm sorry, we can't take it. And I'm talking hypothetically here, but I think it is important. I know it's a few years away, and the delay that has had agreement now, it buys us all a little bit more time. But it's very important that we don't make the same mistakes again, and we lead to that same bottleneck in 3 or 4 years' time that we're experiencing right now. I think that's very important. And that's it. That wraps up for me. So there's a lot in there, I suppose, in that transition period discussion. A lot of it is we're talking down the road, talking now 2021, thankfully for the date of application. We're talking about transition timelines out to 2022, 2023. But I think, you guys know as well as I do, these things come around, as faster than anyone can expect. And it is important we don't take our eye off the ball. It's important that we do discuss them now. We have time to put plans in place, and that's certainly what we would be encouraging at NSCI as a notified body. But just more broadly speaking, to industry, I think it's important we communicate openly about that, and we really get a handle on it before that situation becomes a really difficult one again in 3 or 4 years' time. And thank you for listening.